To connect your please and you will now read.
You may begin typing your questions in for our presenters at any time during the webinar, but please note that we will be only addressing questions at the end of the presentation, and we will do our best to address as many questions as time allows. And with that, let me introduce today's presenters, Kate Barrett and Janet Feinsilver. Kate?
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. My name is Kate Barrett. I'm from St. Catherine University in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I'm very happy to be here with my colleague, Janet, who I met at the last AOTA conference via teleconferencing when we were discussing her project in Guyana. So I'm going to begin today by sharing a little bit about my journey into international work and learning in hopes that it might spark some ideas for you and your interests, as well as give you some ideas about how you can get involved. And I'll also share some of the key components that I think are important when you're thinking about international work and learning. My experiences are shorter in nature, anywhere from 1 week to 3 months in length. And then Janet is going to speak about her experiences, which are significantly longer. So I think it'll be a nice balance. Let's see here. I'm going to forward the slide. So here are some of my experiences. As you can see from this timeline, my interest in international work began over 20 years ago and has continued to grow and develop since that time. I've been involved in volunteer work both while I was working as a staff therapist as well as a faculty member. So I will discuss both. I first became interested in international work as a student when I studied abroad in the Dominican Republic. I definitely caught that travel bug. This was just before I entered occupational therapy school. I had the opportunity to work with Haitians living in Batays in the Dominican Republic. They live in refugee camp-like conditions, except they're not protected by any government or program. There I learned a lot about myself, my privilege, and the very, very different ways the world works outside of the understanding I had had based on my upbringing. I was infused with a curiosity about the world and all of the different ways that people experience it, and I wanted more. When I finished my semester abroad in the Dominican Republic, the seed was planted, and I knew that I would be back. I felt that I had taken so much from that community, and I knew that I needed to give back. I was able to return through locating an organization focused on empowering women and Haitian communities. The Haitian community that I had volunteered in or spent time in as a student wanted education related to health and first aid. I was able to return in the summer between my 2 years in the OT program to do this volunteer work. It was not OT related because I was not yet an occupational therapist, but it was my first taste of what it was like to volunteer as a health professional. After that, I got a job, and as a result of my time in the Dominican Republic, I had the opportunity to apply for a job coordinating groups of occupational therapy and physical therapy students, each coming to spend a month in the Dominican Republic, 1 month out of the year. My employer was generous enough to offer me 2 months of unpaid leave each year, which really meant a lot to me and my job satisfaction, both at my workplace in Chicago as well as my ability to be able to be in the Dominican Republic also. And I think it's interesting to note that as a result of this volunteer work in the Dominican Republic, I was asked to participate in a grant serving the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago, primarily a Mexican neighborhood. This really taught me that you certainly don't have to leave the United States to have these types of experiences. Here we go. As I changed jobs and returned to school, my life did not always permit me to do these short-term volunteer stints, but I was able to maintain relationships through visits, phone calls, and letters as well. And so that maintaining relationships, you'll hear as a theme in this talk, and how important it is to build those relationships with different people and organizations. I then started as a faculty member, and as a faculty member, I've had the privilege of really making international work part of my job. I've developed courses that take me back to the Dominican Republic and Haiti, as well as Ecuador, Peru, and Cuba now. The learning experience I had as a student inspires the courses I develop, how I develop them, the content, where we go, how we travel, etc. I really want students to learn not just about occupational therapy in other countries, but also to give them a chance to experience different ways of doing, being, and becoming, so as to broaden how they think of themselves as global citizens, as well as how they think about themselves as future occupational therapists working with diverse populations. In Ecuador, and I should say that I went to Ecuador because one of my colleagues was from Ecuador, and he and I developed the course together based on the relationships that he had there in Quito. So we certainly didn't start from scratch. The course in Ecuador, students work alongside local therapists working with people with disabilities. They are there to learn about the experience of disability in another country, as well as what it's like to be an OT in that culture. In addition to time in the clinics, as you can see from these pictures, we also spend time getting to know typical occupations in Ecuador, such as music making and weaving. We also spend time with families through family stays, getting to know their patterns and routines of daily life. Of interest to you, perhaps, is that we invite occupational therapists to come with us to help supervise the students in their sites, as well as to learn alongside us. Some of the therapists that have come with us have gone on to start their own international volunteerism and or international practice. This would be one way of getting involved in short-term international work. We also have a program in Peru where we've partnered with an organization called Eleanor's Project, which is out of Montana. It was started up by one of our alums who partners with 2 different organizations in Peru, and she's partnered with them now for 10 years, I believe. This project is focused on positioning and seating for medically fragile children. Each year, she brings 4 or 5 OTs with her who are certified assistive technology professionals, ATPs, to provide the specialized positioning and seating for children. I share this with you because I think as you look for short-term experiences, you can be looking for organizations that have established programs and relationships that you can participate within, rather than sometimes that's a lot easier than trying to start something from scratch. Another example of a course that we have here at St. Kate's is an interdisciplinary course, Social Determinants of Health. Here we learn about things such as access to water, food, sanitation, education, and healthcare in the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, and the U.S. I'm getting a lot of feedback. I wonder if people can hear me. I'm going to keep going until somebody tells me different. So they're learning about social determinants of health, such as access to water, food, sanitation, education, and healthcare. And we do this by traveling to the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, and then, of course, looking at our own system here in the U.S. We compare and contrast how government, culture, and society all influence how social determinants of health are distributed and experienced. I share this with you because for those of you who are within a university, I don't think we need to limit our courses to just occupational therapy courses, but it's really advantageous to also think about the ways that we, about international work and interdisciplinary. As a result of my interest and work and experience, I'm now consulting with the first occupational therapy bachelor program in Haiti at the Episcopal University of Haiti. I'm helping to develop the occupational therapy curriculum for this program. I'm really excited about this work because I think it is the pinnacle of good international work. That is, to build up the profession within the country. Volunteerism is good for short-term efforts and emergency relief. Teaching courses to U.S. students is a good way to plant seeds for future global citizens. But efforts that are focused around building local capacity is most exciting to me. I know that the Haitians can be the OTs and PTs, and they don't need to rely on people from other countries to come and provide that therapy. They just need the education. We've developed a curriculum of interest to some of you perhaps, so that courses are taught in a hybrid fashion, one at a time. So instructors and faculty, international instructors and faculty, can be on the ground in Haiti for 1 to 3 weeks to teach a course. We will be building a Haitian faculty, but we need Haitian therapists before we can build the Haitian faculty. So right now we've built a curriculum where international therapists can come and teach. Here are a couple of pictures of the campus in Haiti, some of the volunteer consultants, a classroom there, and on the upper right-hand corner is their model and values, which are, it's hard to read perhaps, but on the top is honesty, integrity, and communication. Love and empathy are on the left, and service and engagement are on the right. They have a very well-established nursing program, and we're working with them now to start the OT and PT program, and they are just finishing up the first year of that curriculum now. So we're very excited about that. So in conclusion, some of the lessons that I've learned relevant to international engagement is that establishing and maintaining relationships is key, like I said earlier, or to really look for an organization that has done a good job of this and has well-established relationships in the partner country. I think this is really key because that relationship can help define the way in which you work in that country and the goals that you have. If they're all from you and this particular context, they may not be culturally relevant to that country. So having good partnerships and relationships is really key. Be ready to practice cultural humility. Our practice framework here in the United States was not designed to be generalized to other countries. In order to engage in occupational therapy in other countries, it is important to learn about the context. Spend time learning, listening, reading, and observing before jumping in and doing. And be ready to be surprised, to be wrong, and to change your ways and adapt. I also think an important take-home message is to be really clear about why you are interested in international work and to make sure that your goals align with the organization you are participating in or with the goals of your partner organization. And finally, use the World Federation of Occupational Therapy. They have a lot of resources to help you. They also have an Occupational Therapy International Online Network, OTION, where you can post questions and reach out to people practicing occupational therapy throughout the world. Here are some of the resources that I have found of particular help to me when I'm thinking about the international work that I do. When you go to another country, there may or may not be an OT presence in terms of a school or association. If there is, it's important to reach out and educate yourself on the regulations and policies that country has regarding occupational therapy practice. But if there isn't, you have WFOT. They have a code of ethics that applies globally wherever you go. They have a document called Working as an Occupational Therapist in Another Country, which lists, you can look it up by country, which country you're interested in going to, and they will list contact people as well as any visa, licensure considerations that you'll want to know about. Advice for the establishment of a new program for the education of occupational therapists was very helpful to us as we developed curriculum for Haiti. And then they actually have sample curricula there too if you're interested in working with an international academic program. So definitely use the WFOT resources that are there for you, and I will turn it over to Janet and welcome questions at the end. Thank you.
Well, hi, I'm Janet Fine-Silver, and good Election Day afternoon to all of you. So I am going to talk about my international experience in Guyana, South America. I accessed that opportunity as a Peace Corps response volunteer. So want to talk to you a little bit about how to get involved with Peace Corps and Peace Corps response. There are two pathways to signing on as a Peace Corps response volunteer. One is having prior service with the regular Peace Corps experience, which is a 2-year commitment that follows several months of in-country training. And I did have that experience. I was in Mali, West Africa, not as an occupational therapist. And then the other pathway is to have 10 or more years of experience in your field. And with 22 years as a school-based OT, I also qualified from the experience standpoint. To find out where the opportunities are, I've put a link on this slide for the Peace Corps response site. And there's a further link you would have to click on to look at current opportunities in countries all over the world. And when I was looking, there were 2 positions for an occupational therapist in Guyana. One is the one I ultimately took as a curriculum developer working with the University of Guyana's medical rehab program. And the other was as a practicing therapist in the single psychiatric hospital that exists in country. When I applied for 5 different positions, 2 in Guyana and 3 in African countries. And the recruiter wanted me to prioritize the positions. And the curriculum developer position was my top pick. So after a competitive application process, including an interview with the recruiter, I was selected for the position. And the image on this slide just shows you the students that were enrolled in the medical rehab program at the time that I arrived in Guyana. So to prepare for doing this, and for any experience that you would want to have internationally, I would suggest that you learn just as much as you can about the position ahead of time. So how did the position come to exist? What's the backstory? And I didn't get that information until late in my service, and I wish I had known more about that earlier. I'd also suggest making sure you're clear about the position description. My position description did not match what I was ultimately expected to do. I applied to be a curriculum developer, and what I actually did in my year in Guyana was function as a faculty member, lecturer, supervisor of clinical attachments, more so than program developer, which is all I thought I was going to be doing. You'll want to think about other individuals and agencies you'll be working with. You'll want to understand the structure of the agency you're working with. It may be very different than what you're accustomed to in the U.S. Who will be your immediate supervisor? And some of these questions are things you would want to know for a position in the U.S., but they're certainly things you'll want to know internationally. And then in Guyana, they had, for example, no OT texts in libraries. The students weren't required to purchase textbooks. So you want to bring as many resources you can. And for me, I contacted publishers here in the States, and SLAC donated 4 textbooks for me to bring. And as I was doing my service in country, a copy of Occupational Therapy and for Physical Dysfunction was donated to me and the program. So that was very helpful. I had also renewed my membership with AOTA so that I could access articles that are available through them. I also recommend as preparation that you learn just as much as you can about the country you'd be going to. What's the climate there? Guyana is a Caribbean country. It's in the mid to upper 80s year-round and quite humid. So you have to find out culturally. You might want to wear shorts and a tank top in a climate like that, but is that culturally acceptable? And not really. I was expected to dress professionally, and in both of my Peace Corps services, because they're kind of patriarchal countries, with a fair Muslim population, women were expected to be dressed very modestly. So you do want to know as much about the culture and politics as you can learn ahead. Think about whether you're going to have to learn a new language in order to function with an international experience. In Guyana, they speak English, but their first language is Guyanese Creolese. And the English they speak is British English, not American English, and so communication breakdowns can certainly occur. You also want to think about the level of development of the country, because it certainly affects not just what you're looking at from day to day, but how you're living. So will you have electricity? Will you have a toilet? Will you have running water? Will you have clean drinking water? And those are all issues that you want to be prepared for, because you need to know if you can tolerate the conditions of the country you'll be going to. Another thing to think about for preparation is, especially if you're taking a long-term assignment like you would with Peace Corps. So regular Peace Corps, as I said, is 2 years plus training time in country. Peace Corps response positions vary from 4 months to 12 months, and mine was 12 months. So you think about things like putting possessions in storage, putting your vehicle in storage, or finding somebody to drive your vehicle or prepare it for sitting for a long period. If you own your own home, will you want to have somebody renting your home? Will you want to sell your home? Will you want someone to be caring for it for you? What about your personal affairs, getting bills paid while you're gone? Is there someone that can do that for you? And in my case, my sister very generously took care of a lot of things for me. If you are chosen for a Peace Corps position, that's just the beginning. So you have to go through a number of clearances in order to actually go and take on that position. So you have a very in-depth medical clearance that generally will take a couple of months to get through, a lot of vaccinations, and that will vary with the country of service. You have to pass a security clearance, so you need to be fingerprinted and go through those kinds of checks. You will be issued a State Department passport for Peace Corps service. All of these things take time, and all of them have to be completed and in place before Peace Corps makes your travel arrangements and sends you a ticket so that you go to your country of service. So my experience in Guyana began on September 13th, 2015. I met Erin Mercer at JFK Airport. This photograph, I'm on your left and Erin's on your right. Erin is a young woman that was accepted for a parallel position to mine. She's a speech and language pathologist and was accepted to develop the speech, language, and audiology department at University of Guyana, whereas I was establishing the occupational therapy program. Another important person to both of us is the woman in the red circle, Maria Sheena Villarreal, who we call Shine, and she is the coordinator of the medical rehab program at the University of Guyana, also on faculty for physical therapy training. So the way that this program came to be is that the Ministry of Health recognized the need for occupational therapists in the country, and this is because there were a number of OTs who had been there visiting in prior years and had advocated for the profession. And the University of Guyana also recognized that need, and in partnership with the ministry, put together this medical rehabilitation program. It was in existence for a couple years before I came, but for physical therapy only. And there are physical therapists in country. They come from Cuba, from the VSO, which is a volunteer organization for European and Asian volunteers, and of course graduates from the medical rehab program. But up until the point that Erin and I arrived, there were no occupational therapists or speech therapists in the country. Instead, what they had was a rehab assistant program, which was an 18-month training program where they train individuals in all 3 disciplines, but the people training them were generally physical therapists, so their OT training or speech and language training was quite minimal. And after they completed this 18-month training, they would then work in health centers and hospitals throughout the country and provided for OT, PT, and speech needs for the clients that they saw. So when Erin and I arrived, it was the very first year that there would be either OT or speech and language offered. And the way the medical rehab program worked is it was a bachelor's level program, so a 4-year program, but because there had been no OT or speech and language providers in the country up until we came, This was the first year that students actually received training in the OT or speech and language tract. So in their first year, students choose a tract, but as I said, this was the first year they could actually receive training in either OT or speech and language. So when I arrived, we already had students enrolled at the second year, third year, and fourth year levels of the program, even though they had only received very, very minimal OT training by visiting therapists in prior years. So I had 2 fourth-year students and 4 third-year students, only 1 second-year student. Here you can meet Ashley and Zoe, the 2 fourth-year students. And in this slide, you can meet my 4 third-year students. On the right-hand side of the slide, there's Afiza and Regina, who were conducting interviews with clients at the Palms, which is a home for the elderly indigent poor, and they were required to compile that information, and along with information from chart reviews, they had to write up occupational profiles for those clients. And on the left-hand side of the slide, the image, you can meet Erica and Calvin, who were kind of taking a break between interviews. So I had a very intense year with a lot of ups and downs, a lot of positives and negatives. One of the big positives was interfacing with Peace Corps, the students, people from the Ministry of Health, the medical rehab program, staff and physical therapists at the hospitals and clinics where I brought students for clinical experiences, and they all were very grateful for my presence and my efforts. I also engaged over the year with a network of therapists from WFOT, from AOTA. Elizabeth Kohler from Brno University in Georgia became a mentor to me. Susan Fazoli, who's a long-term friend and faculty member at MGH IHP, were both active in connecting me with other faculty members that shared PowerPoints and other materials generously and helped support me through my lecturing and program development activities. So I did feel very positively that I built a foundation that could then, there's lots more work that needs to happen, and is being built on as we speak, because there's a replacement volunteer in Guyana right now doing the same job I did and working with the third-year students who are now fourth-year students. The other positives which you'll have with any international experience are that you actually get to participate in another culture and visit exotic places and have exotic experiences. For me, I actually got to see a leatherback turtle nesting, laying her eggs, and going back to the sea. And it was an absolutely heart-stopping experience, among other wonderful experiences visiting places in Guyana. And you meet people both from the country of service and from other countries in the world, and some of those are going to be lifelong attachments. And I certainly agree with what you heard in your first talk, that these relationships and maintenance of these relationships are key. So there were some negatives for me, and communication breakdowns are one of the things that I think you really can expect in any international experience, and just not knowing what you don't know. So you may ask follow-up questions, but If people aren't forthcoming with the information that you need, you just don't know what you don't know, and that can get in the way. So that's a frustration. And sadly, what I learned and what my gut told me as I entered this is that one academic year is really not sufficient to prepare students to enter practice. So neither of my fourth-year students successfully completed their final clinical attachment, and that was pretty heartbreaking for them and for me. And the head of the department looked for a scapegoat and decided I could be the scapegoat and blamed me for not adequately preparing the students. So those were some negatives. But there are some takeaway thoughts for all of you in terms of having international experiences. One is make sure that your skills are really solid, because this puts added pressure on you as a practicing OT. So you want to not have to worry about questioning your own skills when you're also dealing with adjusting to being in another country, which brings us to the next bullet point. Make sure that you have enough travel experience that you know what you'll be facing, and you'll be reasonably comfortable in an alien environment and culture. Prepare yourself by learning as much as you can about the program you're going to enter and the job situation you'll be facing, and know that up front as much as you possibly can. When you're there, network as much as you can. These people are going to be your lifeline. So again, reinforcing what you heard earlier, WFOT is a wonderful resource, but the therapists you know at home are also good supports for you. And rely on your sense of humor to get you through the tough times. The more you can laugh about it, the more successful you're going to be. And as OTs, we pride ourselves on being adaptable and flexible. You will need that for an international experience. So at this point, I think we're ready to consider your questions. And so I'm going to turn things back to Kate to take the first question on her list.
Great. Thanks, Janet. Janet and I are just going to take turns answering questions, but the first couple of questions I can easily answer. A couple of you asked about OTA participation. Yes, absolutely. We've taken OTAs, and thank you for that question, and I'm sorry I didn't mention it. We've taken OTAs with us to Ecuador, and we bring OTA and OT students to Ecuador with us. So we definitely appreciate when we can find a COTA to come with us to Ecuador. The other questions were more specific to Haiti and the program there. We did get it approved by WFOT, so we did everything within following the WFOT guidelines, so it is congruent with those guidelines. Faculty come from different countries. Right now they are all international faculty from Canada, England, the U.S., and France. The curriculum is in French, the official language of Haiti, but there are translators for the faculty that come. So you don't have to be able to, you don't have to know French in order to volunteer. So I thought I could capture a couple of questions all at once. So Janet, I'll turn it over to you to answer how many questions you decide.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just messing with my screen to make it a little bigger because I can't actually see all of the questions. Okay, it looks like this one is for you, Kate. Sorry, everybody. I'm having just a little technical difficulty here. Here's one for me. I'm really having trouble. Oh, who makes the living arrangements in the country where you're working? Okay, so for Peace Corps does take care of that. And so there was an apartment that had been arranged for me to live in Guyana, and I had electricity and running water, but no hot water for the showers except in the heat of the day when it would heat up in the pipes. In Mali, we had a pit toilet and no running water. In both countries, we had to treat our drinking water. And I can't see who this next question is assigned to. There's one about how did you address language barriers, how fluent should you be. So I'm going to talk about that for Peace Corps again. In Peace Corps, it's for me. Okay, this is my question. So in Peace Corps, if you're in a country which is a non-English speaking country, with regular Peace Corps service, you have several months of training before you're sworn in as a volunteer. And if it's a non-English speaking country, you will receive language training in the country. So when I was in Mali, in West Africa, I learned 2 languages. I had some French-speaking experience prior to going to Mali. Mali was a French colony, and I had additional French-speaking training while I was in Mali, and also training to speak Bambara, which is the native language. Now I'm trying to see if there are any. Okay, there's a whole lot of more questions.
I can jump in, Janet, while you read your questions if you'd like.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Okay, great. So, Carol, you asked, how does the department budget for equipment for the program? We don't bring equipment with us. We try to use things that are, I'm assuming you're asking about the St. Kate's department. We try to use things that are locally available. The more equipment you bring with you, the more dependence we find we're creating. So we really, even when, well, I shouldn't say that. Sometimes when people want to donate things, such as school supplies or medications, we find an organization to distribute that. But we're really not bringing OT equipment. So if that was your question, we don't budget for that.
And let me just say for the Peace Corps, oh, sorry, Kate. I was just going to jump in and say for Peace Corps experience, Peace Corps does not provide you with supplies. They also have this concern about sustainability and using available things within the country. My position being with the university, I had anticipated that there would be resources in a university library, and that was not the case. So I sought out donations and tried to begin the establishment of an OT library within the university.
Yeah, and I would say that same thing in Haiti. Certainly books as resources are really important. When I was thinking about the question with equipment, like we don't bring things like therapy balls or, those kinds of things.
And likewise for me.
Yeah, okay. There was a question about, do you need a particular license to work as an international OT? That's where WFOT really comes into to help. You can look up what is required by a particular country. So it's not an international license, but it depends country to country. So you want to look at where you're going and what it is that they require you to have.
Oh, and I just managed to change my screen, so I think I can look at questions a little more effectively at this point. There's a question about an examination process for the students to become able to administer occupational therapy. So that's in development in Guyana, and during my service, I basically developed a protocol to evaluate their final clinical attachment that was based on AOTA's protocol, along with one from Brno University that's considered a level 1, and I used those both as models and got their permission to use the one that I developed based on theirs. We also developed, in Guyana, they wanted a practical competency exam. And so we had set up for a panel to observe the student in action. But the students, my understanding of policy was that they had to pass the clinical attachment to be eligible for that. My students were not eligible, but the department had told me I should never have canceled the practical exam. Kate, did you want to take another question? Okay, Kate is no longer with us, so I'm going to just keep talking. And it looks like I have a question. If you volunteer through the Peace Corps and still have student loans, are those deferred through your volunteer time? My understanding is yes to that question, but you better check me on that because I never needed to do that myself. But I'm pretty sure that the answer is yes. And then here's another question for me. Is there an examination process for the students to be, oh, we already talked about that one. And I think that may be all the questions addressed to me. So Kate, I see you're back, and if you want to field further questions.
Sure, thanks. Opportunities in China or India, you know, the people that I know that are working in China is Creighton University. Kalimu has a partnership in China, so he is a connection for you. K-E-L-I-M-U. He's in the OT department at Creighton. I don't know about other opportunities in India. In terms of language barriers, I know that Janet also spoke to this, but for Ecuador, it's clear that the more Spanish you speak, the better experience that you have. And we are requiring our students to use the Duolingo free app to learn Spanish. Duolingo has a lot of different languages, and at least it's better than nothing. Our students can't, or they have a hard time taking a Spanish class on top of everything else that they're doing. But, you know, I would say the more language skills you have, the better. And to encourage students or yourself to learn as much as possible. Somebody asked about where we were in Peru. We partner with an organization called, it's actually a parish called Yankanawasi. They have a special education program serving children and their families in Lima. And then we actually partner with a group in Canada and work with them, Equip Kids, they're called. And we will go to either Puerto Maldonado or Cusco with them.
I have a note here that there are a lot of questions I haven't answered, so I have one here. What is the name of the oh, whoops, wrong one. So this is getting confusing about which ones are for me. How did I address language? And you talked about that, Kate. I wonder if...
Here, I can read you one, Janet.
Okay.
Let's see here. What if you were unable to fulfill your expected requirement and needed to return home?
Okay, with Peace Corps, sure. So as a volunteer with Peace Corps, they certainly hope that you will complete your assignment and achieve what's called completion of service, or COS. But things come up in life, and it may be a medical issue, or there might be political upheaval during your service, and there might be things happening in your family. And if you need to leave, it's called early termination. And as I said, you're not a prisoner, you're a volunteer, so you can return to the U.S. at any time. And with Peace Corps experience, Peace Corps will pay for your transport to the country of service and back home again. Unlike other kinds of international experiences where you may have expenses in order to have that international experience, one of the huge benefits of serving with the Peace Corps is they take care of all the expenses, and they also give you a stipend for living expenses as you perform your service, and they also give you a small stipend for each month that you receive upon your return back to the U.S., which is called a relocation allowance. So you actually get a little bit of cash when you return to the U.S. So that's an advantage of Peace Corps service.
There are a few questions about how you take time out from your career and when would be a good time to do that. For me, doing the short term and being able to take unpaid leave, I feel really boosted me in my career, because I started to be seen as a therapist that could work effectively with clients from other countries that didn't speak English. I mentioned the opportunity I had on a grant in the Pilsen neighborhood. So I see it sometimes as a way of setting yourself apart. I think a lot of organizations really value when somebody has worked abroad and has that experience and can bring it to the workplace. So I didn't see it as an interruption. I never quit. I had to quit a job, however, to do it. So, I suppose it depends on the area that you're in and how competitive workplaces are. But I did not see it as a detriment to my career in any way.
I have another question that I'm not sure I can answer, but Susan Schwartz asked about when she graduated from her OT program in the mid-'70s. She said there was an international program called VISTA that was recruiting new grads. Do I see a similar program on the horizon for today's OT grads in a more supervised setting? I am not aware of something like that. So regular Peace Corps, at the time that I signed up, I didn't see any OT positions there. When I looked at the Peace Corps response site, I saw many OT positions. And I didn't remember VISTA being an international experience. So I guess you would just have to do a little research on that. I'm sorry, I can't answer more definitively.
I had a question about, since being able to communicate with your patients' clients is an important aspect of client-centered therapy, how do you get past the barrier of not sharing a common language? For me, I speak Spanish, and I go to Spanish-speaking countries. I also speak Creole, so I can communicate with Haitians. So I think you're probably asking about the students that go to Ecuador that don't necessarily speak a lot of Spanish, and they are not treating clients. They are working alongside therapists, and there's always a translator at each site. So it's either somebody who knows how to, an Ecuadorian who can speak English, or one of our groups that can speak Spanish that facilitate translation. So that's how we get around it. I don't want to limit it to to students who only speak Spanish or have a certain amount of Spanish, because I think it can also be an incentive to learn Spanish, or learn another language. But I do make sure that there's some level of translation available at each site.
I've got another one here. Would I speak about international school-based positions and other opportunities for OTs who are not on an academic track? So I'm actually not aware of that, and I'm thinking that an international experience would probably be a broader base sort of thing, where you'd probably need to be more of a generalist. In Guyana, for example, the whole educational system is far behind the U.S., and in terms of special ed and including children with disabilities in the educational system, they're very far behind the U.S. So they're at maybe the very beginning of looking to bring specialists. There are a couple of programs in Guyana for children with autism that were developed by non-governmental organizations, and they actually did have a very short-term OT opportunity with one of those in Guyana, but I think that sort of thing would be few and far between. I also have one here, expenses paid for by Peace Corps, and yes, I think I've answered that already. Yes, those are paid for by Peace Corps. Another question, do I know of any opportunities in Japan? And you'd have to get on the site and look.
I think that we're just about done here. Opportunities versus volunteer or paid, I would say that what we do in Ecuador, it's kind of a hybrid where the professional pays some of the OT pays some of her or his expenses, and then the program covers some of them, but I think you'll find a lot more volunteer unpaid opportunities than you find paid opportunities. But again, on that OTION site for WFOT, there are job postings. Send books. I would call your local university to see if they can use books, if they go anywhere where they could use those books. And then in terms of having therapists come here to the U.S. to be further trained, I think there are some instances of that, or other countries that may be more like them. I don't think the U.S. is always the best place to come for training, depending on the context of the country, but I know that there are a lot of exchanges between countries in South America. So I think I tried to squeeze in the last two questions.
Yeah, both Janet, you and Kate, you guys did an amazing job today. So we are out of time. So I just want to thank you, Kate and Janice, for presenting today. Thank all of you for attending, and of course, thank you for being AOTA members. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Same to you.